Sandra, thank you very much for giving me all the difficult jobs this afternoon, and it's great to look through the 200 words that the three panellists there put forward for you in total. And when you look at what they've done between them, they've been executive and non-executive members of FTSE boards. They've been advocates publicly for responsible business. They've been right at the heart of Britain's major bank, at the heart of the biggest crisis in our lifetime, getting messages right and policy right. They've been at the BBC, they've set up businesses, they've invested money for impact, they've been academics. I don't think anybody is better able to answer Sir John's question about say and do, closing the gap, than three people who, ladies and gentlemen, have spent their life saying things and getting the right things done. So please welcome them.
I think I'm having a Sir John moment now. I'm dying to hear what we're going to say. Extraordinary. And we, between us, in this seamless way, I'm going to sort of host the conversation, but chip in. So we've sort of all agreed that might be quite good. But I now don't need to do a magnificent big up of Jyoti and Jenny because Neil fabulously did that. So thank you. I think we've also felt that we all sit in either watch or are participants of panels over the time. So we sort of had a little collaborative moment before today and felt that we sort of want you to leave the room now if you're not determined to and resolved to make a change and do something different as a result of not what you hear now, but the whole afternoon. So no pressure. And we also felt the need to somehow get onto questions to have a proper conversation and for everyone to share their own best practice. So we bring that to bear into the room. Because for all that Neil's lovely words, we're very aware that the wisdom, if we can capture that, the wisdom, the strength of the wisdom of the numbers is quite profound. So I'm going to kick off and ask Jyoti to talk a little bit about integrated reporting, because you feel passionately that that is one of the mechanisms that we can use to get to the elusive helping the elephant dance. That was also the other thing, by the way, that we now understand, thank you, Sandra, that elephants dancing is about taking a great big corporate and it seems impossible they'll do anything and getting it to dance. So you can make of that what you will, but Jyoti, integrated reporting and more.
Oh, well, I guess right at the outset, I'd probably say I couldn't care less about integrated reporting. Apologies for that. I was one of the team that helped create the movement for integrated reporting, and really the reason for doing it was because we were seeing stacks and stacks of formal reports coming out of companies which told you amazing things about their financial performance. And they were largely unreadable, so most people didn't care about them. In fact, one person I remember, when he was given the job to produce to produce a report for his company, his predecessor said, when you produce a report, your boss may read it because he may have to sign it as the CEO. Your auditor will read it because you're paying him to do so. And if you're really unlucky, a judge will read it in about 10 years' time, and you might have to go to jail. So, reporting really was broken in terms of actually having any kind of impact. And so we got a group of people together to say, do you think it's broken? And it turned out a lot of people felt it was broken. And the main reasons for doing so was really because our obsession is with capital. But by that, we mean financial capital. And we want to know, when we have this financial capital coming into our business, what do we do with it? And what is the return on it? And who cares about it? Well, clearly the people who get rewarded with financial capital and the people who provided the financial capital, because they're hoping for a return as well. But actually, every business creates value using a variety of sources, a variety of resources, if you like. And we started calling them capitals. So we said, well, you use natural capital, you use human capital, you use relationship capital. What's the return you're making on these things? And many companies said to us, well, we have no idea. And when you look at value today of a listed company, probably 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 times what's listed in the balance sheet is what in the market is quoted as the value of the company. So what's all this other stuff? Well, it turns out these other capitals are in play. So from my perspective, is capitalism broken? I think, yeah, because we focus on one narrow aspect of it. We obsess about it, when actually we should be asking, what does multi-capitalism look like? So that's my answer.
Thank you. And so thinking somewhat controversially what Sir John said, and that lovely quote, actually you're taking it further and farther and deeper, aren't you? To go from actually, it is about thinking about the economic prosperity of a company into something much bigger.
Well, I guess if you are just going to say we need to make money and then we'll do some good things, I would really say quite often the companies who are making the money, who end up doing some of the good things, are doing really bad things in the making of the money. And why do we think that that's okay? And then allow them to get away with doing a few things on the side. You know, maybe they got 50 people or 100 people or 200 people doing some really good things, but they got 50,000 people doing serious damage, either in terms of natural capital, in terms of human capital, in terms of relationships, etc. Is that okay? Well, I would say, what if we could do the right thing in the short term, in the medium term, in the long term, across all the capitals, and across all the stakeholders who care? Now, most businesses wouldn't know how to answer that question because we're still learning how to understand who the stakeholders are, what actions we take in our businesses that make a difference to them. But we got to start somewhere.
Indeed, indeed. And one of the ways to start that is purpose, isn't it, Jenny? Because I know you're pretty passionate about the ramifications of this and how you take it on.
Yes, I mean, if we take the premise that we're moving from a single capital to a multi-capital world, I think the world as it is set up to enable the single capital rather than the multi-capital. So, for example, business models, leaders, certainly communication is focused more on the single than the multiple capital. And in some ways, you might think, well, that's a pretty simple conundrum then. You just identify what the multiple capitals are and figure out how to derive value from those multiple capitals. And I think, there's no need to overcomplicate these things. In some ways, that is what's happening. But we're operating in a different context. This change is well documented. You know, I'm sure every person, every generation thinks that they've lived through the most change ever. I'm sure the Victorians felt that, but it does feel particularly unpredictable at the moment. The last couple of weeks, evidence of that. And we're also living in an age of radical transparency. So it's not enough anymore to polish the outside of the box and just hope that you're going to get away with that, because I just don't think you can anymore. So somehow in all of that, the world is an awful lot more complicated. And to add on to the complications, some of those capitals that we're trying to manage and that we're trying to get the right messages to are intangible, and we're not really used to dealing with that. One of my favorite stats is that 40 years ago, 80% of companies' balance sheets were intangible capitals, and now it's flipped. 80% are in intangibles, which is the human capital. It's the, it's the big, the brains who make the algorithms. It's the relationships and the network economy. It's the environmental capital. It's reputation capital. It's trust. And I'm not sure we've all figured out just yet how to derive the most value from those intangible capitals. I'm not sure the business models are there. I'm not sure the communication models are there. And I believe that having a purpose to guide how you treat those capitals becomes invaluable. And by purpose, I just want to be really clear. I don't mean that you're a nice company and you sacrifice your profit in order to be a nice company. I really think that the two go hand in hand, purpose and profit, over the long term. I don't think it's a trade-off anymore, and I don't, maybe I'm subject to confirmation bias, but I think that we are reaching these tipping points where consumer power, because of the platform of the internet and so forth, people want to know that they're interacting with a company that has genuinely got a purpose. And a purpose can be just a reason for existing. I might not agree with the purpose, but it's a reason for existing. And if people know that, then you can manage your capitals accordingly.
And it's actually quite interesting that Jamie Dimon and the Business Roundtable have come up with the idea that perhaps their purpose has changed, because they always had a purpose, which is to make as much money as possible for their shareholders. But now they're asking a somewhat different question. I mean, I'm not entirely convinced they currently know what the tools are by which they can deliver a different purpose or different shades of purpose, but it's a conversation that's happening out there.
Yeah.
Can I make a shameless plug for our Responsible Business Tracker at this
Go for it.
Must write to Jane Dimon. Because we did a piece of work where we've developed an improvement tool for responsible business, because we're thinking responsible business, very much the way you described it, now needs to be intrinsic. This isn't a program thing. It isn't a thing you do on the side. It has to be making commercial decisions at the heart of your business that will make a change. And, you know, if you're Sky, for instance, and you decide to go single-use plastic-free, that's a massive decision. Every part of your supply chain needs to change. You have to be really thoughtful and, frankly, quite bloody-minded and determined to make that happen. So I use that as just one example. So we developed an improvement tool. We prototyped it with 64 companies, and the stat that stands out rather terrifyingly, I think, is that 86% of companies declared they had a purpose statement, but then only 17% of them said they actually had a plan for how, at a team level, that was going to be delivered. And so I think we are absolutely scarily in this purpose-wash land, that we very quickly have to drive action and proper activity off the back of it. And then if you take it a little bit further and say, okay, have you heard of the UN's global goals, which of course are the kind of to-do list for the world down rather than a practical to-do list for the business up, but where do they meet? You've got only 16% of companies saying they've interpreted the risk inherent in the global goals, or in other words, in not delivering on the global goals. Just 16% have thought about the risk of not delivering on that, which I just thought was interesting, the point you made earlier about risk and your integrated reporting and the driver for getting people to do it.
Yeah, I guess, you know, in the nearly 6 years since the integrated reporting framework was released, there are now nearly 2,000 listed companies around the world who have started using it. And I look at them and wonder, you know, why are you doing it? What's your motivation? And for some of them, it's because they're genuinely trying to understand what a world of multiple capitals looks like. How do you act on it? How do you manage your business, balancing these things? Because let's face it, we can't maximize the return on 6 different capitals as identified in the integrated reporting framework. So we're going to be balancing the return in the short term, in the medium term, in the long term. But some other businesses have done it because I think it's just good fashion. And so there are probably some really poor pieces of fiction that are dressed up as integrated reports out there. And I guess we need to learn how to understand these reports so that we can call out good practice and call out really bad practice.
But I liked the idea that the people that engaged in it more wholeheartedly were the ones that had realised the risk. So once they identified the risk inherent in not doing it, that suddenly galvanised a bit more action in terms of doing this properly and putting a bit more effort behind it, if I understood correctly.
Absolutely, but there have been different reasons why people do it. So for example, you and I were talking earlier about XRO, which is a South African mining company, and their motivation for doing it was because they said, actually, we have natural capital risks, we have human capital risks, we have intellectual capital risks. How are we managing them? And that was their motivation. Others have come along, like, for example, SAP is a German software company. And, you know, I've come from the tech world, and in the tech world, your standard response when asked, what is your secret? You must say this, it's our people. That's the standard response. Now, when SAP started doing their integrated report, they discovered they didn't actually know how many people they had in the company, let alone what made these people special. So then they went away to do some homework, and they came back with a view that actually, for every 1% change in employee engagement that they had in their organization, they could see a 55 million euro impact on their non-IFRS operating profit. So all of a sudden, you have more engaged employees, you're making more money. And they announced this to the world, but the CFO of the company said to me, actually, the biggest challenge I've had is from within the company, because the employees are saying, what rubbish are you talking? We don't believe any of this stuff. And he said, what has really helped us is it's changed the conversation inside the company. Because in the past, you'd go along to an SAP head of division and say, how are we faring? And the answer would be, we're doing great, meaning we're hitting all the financial numbers. How are we doing on people? This really important driver value in our company? Great, talk to HR about it. I don't have a clue. That's the standard kind of response. They may not use those words. But now, how are we doing on people? Well, actually, it's an issue we all have to pay attention to. And that's the message he was getting back. And he said, do I really trust the 55 million euro number? I don't know. But I'm going to start here because it's changing the conversation.
Yeah. Jenny, what do you think? Is there a magic formula? What would you do if you were advising a CEO? And they're sort of not knowing how to start?
So I think there's a great tendency, particularly in our business, sometimes to overcomplicate these things. I think it starts with a collective conversation about what the purpose of the company is. Why does the company exist? And then it's, I think, as simple as figuring out who the multiple stakeholders are in that company who need to know what this purpose is and how they feed into it. And then putting a framework in place that allows them to do that, putting some public targets in. Certainly having spent so long at the Bank of England where you don't have shareholders, you don't have voters, you don't have any legitimacy other than trust, really, particularly since the levers that that's your license to operate comes from trust, but the levers that you then have to pull entirely rely on trust. Money is a piece of paper. Don't tell anybody. And interest rates.
I thought it's a plastic card.
It is now, yeah. And interest rates, the bank can say it's going to change interest rates, and there are, the monetary transmission mechanism that helps that to happen. But banks and building societies don't have to change their mortgage rate in response if they don't believe it, if it's not credible. And I think that the communication lesson from that is the need for transparency and accountability. And I do think there are probably some lessons that private sector can learn from that, which is in the case of the purpose-driven, and again, I must reiterate, by purpose, I mean why you exist. Mm-hmm. I don't mean that you're a tree hugger or something. Mm-hmm. But in the case of the purpose-driven, if the targets that you set the people in the organisation are public and the people are accountable for that, then you're much more likely to hit them. If you put the management framework in place to enable that to happen and for the reporting to go up to board level, you're much more likely to hit it. If you can measure it, as you say, if you can put a value on it to say that if you don't do X, you're going to have a higher churn rate in your employee base if you don't give them a strong purpose, and this is going to cost you X billion pounds a year in recruitment, in lost productivity, in posts being vacant, then the board will sit up and take notice, because you are then doing your fiduciary duty by making the most, by trying to generate the most value for your organisation. So again, it's not an either or. I don't believe it is.
Yeah. Thank you. Shall we open it up? So who's made an elephant dance? So, ideas and thoughts, or indeed questions, on the subject that we've been talking about. Hello. As before, do stand up and say who you are. And
hello, Amanda. It's Catherine.
Oh, hello. If my eyesight was any better, I'd have spotted that. I'm so sorry.
It's Catherine May. Hi, I'm Catherine May. I'm a portfolio non-exec following a career as a corporate affairs director when I did have responsibility for sustainability in 3 of our big FTSE 100s, one after the other. And through the time that I've been involved in seeing ESG evolve, I do think that elephants are dancing in the sense that it is much higher up the agenda and much more embedded in boardroom discussions than it ever was. I now have a role that takes me into the pension sector on a regular basis, including a conference in pensions I was at this morning. And I now find that there is never a discussion about new forms of investment or innovation in pension funding that do not include ESG as a very important tick point on where we are going to put pensions funds for every single CIO that's out there in that sector. So I think there are definitely lots and lots of green shoots, perhaps some really established. What I would really like to get the panel's view on is one part of that equation of ESG, sustainability, accountability, that I think businesses are finding the hardest, and that is executive pay, which I don't think we've touched on yet today. And I'd love to hear what you think about how businesses can bite the bullet on really facing themselves down about being fair about what the people at the top of the business take home.
Do you want me to go? Or you?
I do.
Oh, you want me to go? Okay. Thank you for your comment and your question. First, if I may just comment briefly on ESG or environmental social governance factors. We are seeing a rise in terms of funds using ESG factors so that it's not just driven by purely financial metrics, especially in Europe, much less so in the United States. We are seeing this. We're seeing pension funds particularly because they're thinking longer term. We're seeing more of it. I worry about the fact that much of the ESG metrics are meaningless. They might tell you a little bit about the fact that one company uses, let's say Jenny's company is producing the same stuff as my company, but with half the carbon emissions. Well, then Jenny's company is more efficient. So that's a good thing. However, perhaps my company or your company is not doing what we're doing. You have double the carbon emissions of us, but you're actually transitioning the energy model altogether. So we're moving from carbon to something else. And it's taking a lot of energy to do it, but you're moving the whole world into a different place. On an ESG score, Jenny's going to come first. I'm going to come second. You're a dreadful third. And actually, we should be looking at how your organization works, because that's where the focus should be. So for me, ESG does worry me, because I find that it doesn't often understand what's driving value. Executive pay, well, we have built a whole system around how this shareholder primacy idea, where actually I think what we have isn't shareholder primacy. I think what we have is executive primacy. It's dressed up to look like shareholder primacy. So it says, you know what? We're achieving for our shareholders everything our shareholders might want, which is a better outcome. I'm a shareholder in almost all the listed companies there are, because I've got a pension fund and I've got savings assets. And I probably have, nobody could care about what my opinion is when it comes to the execs. But they can reward themselves hugely by saying that they do. So I am concerned about where executive pay is going, and I think it's part of a whole machine where financial capital is the only capital that counts. Wouldn't it be great? And we are seeing businesses now. So for example, Standard Bank in South Africa, every single employee in the business, including the CEO and the management team, are rewarded on 5 different types of metrics in terms of performance. So it's not just about financial performance alone, but I think it is an issue.
I'm conscious to get some questions. So Jenny, any thoughts?
All I say is, as an economist, you just constantly look at the incentive structures. And if you are moving to a different world where different capitals matter rather than the single financial, then you may find that the market does a little bit of the work for you.
And my thoughts would be, couple of thoughts actually. Think about the bottom. So wouldn't it be amazing if people really put as much effort into arguing why they justify executive pay as to trying to get the company to pay a real living wage for everybody? And to an extent, the multiples will solve themselves. And, you know, Capita have put 2 employees on the board. I think that is an amazingly good, thoughtful thing. The process was phenomenal. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't designed to be disruptive. It was designed to be progressive. And I do think it takes some brave CEOs to go, I earn enough, I don't need any more, as the Richard Pennycock at Co-op did a few years ago. So I think it's a combination of those. Right, somebody right at the very far back.
Thank you. My name is Paul Polizotto. I'm the CEO and founder of GiveWith over from the United States. We're talking about ESG, and we're talking about $31 trillion of social impact investing. $1 in $4 being invested is in those funds, at least using ESG ratings as some form of guidance. And I think to Jenny's point about the market, Facebook was recently dropped from an index because their ESG rating dropped below a certain level. And I think that's going to force CEOs to begin to understand the importance of those ratings. And I think those ratings are going to evolve. I think it's still quite early on, and I'd like to see those ratings systems and evolve, because I think it'll, to Jenny's point, allow the market to begin to use them more effectively to truly understand these companies, who's performing well and who's not, and what are the implications when you're not.
I think we would probably agree with that. More questions? Thank you. There was a question from the lady just ahead. In front. Oh, keeping on your toes there, sorry. We'll try and speed to everybody very quickly.
Hi, I'm Fionnuala O'Connor. I'm from Project Kindy, and I wanted to ask about technology, because one of the things we're doing at Project Kindy is looking at how data scientists and other people who are building automated systems are working with companies. Something that's coming out of our research is an absolute silence when it comes to issues of multiple forms of capital, social responsibility, in terms of what the data scientists are telling us they're being told to do. Have you seen technology being used to be both exploring the issues and also exploring the solutions, or is what the data scientists telling me what the reality is out there?
If I can just have a small bite at that, I think as ever with these things, if you can measure it, you can manage it. It's a cliche, but cliches are there for a reason. And I think there's a lot of work to be done, and interesting work that is being done. We were at a firm this morning that is doing some very interesting work, looking at the value of data to firms and finding out, using that to find out where the firm is, where the value drivers are in a firm. So again, if you take that multiple capital example, if it turns out that your data shows you that actually one of the non-financial capitals is driving your value, and it's becoming easier and easier to isolate those in data buckets, then again, the incentives will kick in and firms will be able to give more of their management time to that.
Yeah. What I would say to that is they sound like gold dust, those data scientists. I want to put them in a room, ask them what's the very worst thing they think could be done with the data, and then you create a customer charter to protect against it. But because those gals, are in a world which, frankly, a lot of us don't understand at the depth that they are, it is really the unknown unknown. So how amazing to get them to go, actually, we could do this. So you go, great. So we defend and protect against it. But I think we have to be, to your point of earlier, open and transparent in order to get to that point. Any burning things? Or I'm going to move on to another question.
Well, the only thing I'd say is we often try to do with technology the same things we could do before. And if our management tool set is largely driven by looking at tangibles, and we don't understand how to do anything with intangibles, well, we often don't bring any insight to what to do with technology to help us in those situations.
Yes. I think I've got time for one more question. 2 minutes. 2 minutes. There was a question there. Thank you. That looks like Peter.
Hi, Peter Morgan. I'm a consultant, but before that I was Corporate Affairs Director at Rolls-Royce and BT, and I've had the great pleasure of working with 2 of the panellists in my career. I strongly agree with what Jenny was saying about the importance of a business understanding its purpose. But a tension that I've seen is that I've worked for 2 large organisations where in the bowels of the organisation people tended to stick around for 20 years. And at the boardroom, they tended to stick around for 4. And there is a real tension between a chief executive's desire to establish his own vision and strategy and define the purpose of the company, and the tolerance of people who've been there for 20 years for great change. And I think that in defining a business purpose, it's really important to be respectful of the heritage and the tradition of the company. And I wondered what the panel thought about the tension between the rapid turnover of CEOs in particular and the need to establish a purpose of a company which makes sense to people who are perhaps going to work there for a generation.
I think this is where, again, where my experience in the quasi-public sector is a very different one. So for a start, a governor of the Bank of England now has an 8-year term. It's a fixed term, but it's a pretty long term. You know, it's long enough to make a difference. But the remit doesn't change. No matter who the person who comes in next, the purpose, if you like, of the Bank of England doesn't change. And it's, and in fact, when I was there and leading the strategy, in order to form our new strategy, we went back to the bank's original charter more than 300 years ago and pulled out the bit in the middle that said, we are working for the good of the people. So the bank's strategy and mission became working for the good of the people of the United Kingdom to maintain monetary and financial stability. So that was a great example of where the underlying purpose of its existence hasn't changed over more than 300 years, despite the churn at the top and despite incredible innovation in the bank and the policies that they use and in their ability to attract the brightest, best, most inquisitive young minds who are excited to work in this cutting-edge environment. And yet the underlying purpose is respected. Now, how you transpose that into a private sector is a challenge, and it's a good challenge, and I'd like to think about it a little bit more. But I feel certain that it's got something to do with, again, not just focusing on short-term financial capital, because that just smashes that whole long-term purpose-driven model to pieces.
I think Sandra wants to throw us out.
Yeah. I do not want to throw you out. What a wonderful session. I'm afraid, Amanda, do you want to have a final wrap-up comment?
Oh, no, well, I wanted to thank Jyoti and Jenny, and I wanted to say to Peter a couple of thoughts. I think the answer usually lies in the people that have been in the company forever. Board tenure 9 years, so leverage that, and then make sure you've got a CEO who genuinely wants to think long-term, albeit they might get kicked out after 4.
Fantastic. Thank you.